Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I'm delighted to talk to Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik al-Attas. You're most welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a great pleasure for me to be here.
Assalamu alaikum. It's great to have you.
Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dr. Syed is the eldest son of the internationally famous Malaysian Muslim philosopher, Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib al-Attas, and I am the proud owner of just two of his father's many works. This is the one I'm currently reading, Islam and Secularism. Actually, it is surprisingly good. I say surprising because, you know, this is a subject that's been written a lot about, but actually it's very, very insightful, very learned, a very close acquaintance with Western intellectual thought and the Islamic tradition, obviously.
Yes.
And the other book, which is even better, if I can put it that way, is a prolegomena to the metaphysics of Islam, an exposition of the fundamental elements of the worldview of Islam. And the title, prolegomena, it just reminded me of Kant. Immanuel Kant also had that name on one of his works. I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but these two works are outstanding books, which I highly recommend if you can get your hands on them.
Yes.
Back to you, sir. Dr. Syed is a former Director General of the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, a Kuala Lumpur-based think tank, and he subsequently worked in the corporate sector. His PhD from the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. He's published several academic works and has written many articles and delivered lectures on a wide range of subjects at various venues locally and internationally. Today, Dr. Syed has kindly offered to talk about a subject which I think is very close to your heart, sir, the root cause of the crisis in the Muslim world, which you have diagnosed as the corruption of knowledge, So could you explain to us the root of this problem and what's the way forward, do you think?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Well, first, let's talk a little bit about those two books you mentioned just now by my father.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people classify him as the Muslim philosopher, but in reality, he's not just a Muslim philosopher.
No.
He is also a theologian. He is also a Sufi master. He is also many, many things. He's a linguist. He is a poet. And therefore, to buttonhole him into one category is a little bit, what do you call it?
Unfair.
Misleading, perhaps.
Misleading, yes, indeed.
But those two books that you mentioned just now, in fact, the first one that you mentioned, the Islam and Secularism, my father published that in 1976. In fact, this was following a lecture that he gave much earlier in the early 70s, talking about Islam, secularism, and what was the other one? And the Islam, secularism, and I can't remember the name of the exact title of the lecture, but that's what led to this book, Islam and Secularism.
Right.
And in that book itself, I think my father does allude to the fact that the corruption of knowledge is what is plaguing the Muslims, in particular at this time, more than at any other time, perhaps. But I mean, this is not something that is particular to this period alone. I mean, we've heard of Muslim theologians of the past, Juwayni, for instance, as Ghazali's teacher.
Yes.
I mean, he was probably one of the few, or rather one of the many, who classified the man or people into four kinds. And it's that category of classification that Juwayni did, perhaps, that we can allude to the fact that this is also warning about the corruption of knowledge. But today, more than any other time in the Muslim world, this corruption of knowledge has become so pervasive. And it's precisely because of what my father writes in that Islam and Secularism. Firstly, that there is a widespread ignorance. And this ignorance has led to injustice, has led to lots of injustice. And this injustice has led to confusion amongst the Muslims. And then that confusion gives rise to the false leadership. And this false leadership, therefore, continues adding to the confusion, adding to the problems, adding to the ignorance, and gives rise to more false leadership. And that vicious circle doesn't seem to end. And that's what we are facing now. I mean, this book written in 1976 was a warning to the Muslims at that time, that they should be warned about what they're doing, what their emphasis is, and how to overcome it. And in fact, my father did give the solutions to these problems. He identified what the problems were and gave solutions. And the primary solution, obviously, was education, a proper Islamic education. But because the people who were entrusted with this wisdom, they are not prepared to accept it, or they are not prepared to understand it, and therefore they ultimately end up corrupting what he says and putting it in their own framework. And what arises is this so-called Islamic education system, which is actually a corruption of the Islamic worldview, actually, in my opinion. I mean, in my view, I think that the emphasis, the immense emphasis on the legal system or the judiciary or the law is really, I mean, it's really deviating from the real problems, because you can't legislate everything, but they think that you can.
Right.
And this is the thing. I mean, this kind of a legalistic education is not something which is difficult. That's another thing. It's not a difficult subject. And why the Muslims are not interested to do difficult subjects is beyond me. Because, I mean, this is something that we need to do. I mean, you yourself, probably, Paul, you can feel the stupidity today, isn't it? I mean,
well, I'm very aware of the stupidity, particularly from myself. Actually, I'm constantly amazed at my own stupidity. But I doubtless maybe other people share it to a lesser extent. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I share your opinion on your classification of yourself, but I'm saying that, I mean, we now, the Muslims today, we like to look on the Muslims in the past nostalgically as to how powerful we were, how much wealth we had, how big our empire was, and things like this, how many scholars we had in the past. But we don't seem to learn anything from it. I mean, let alone learn anything from what the Quran is telling us. I mean, the Quran does not. I mean, the emphasis on the Quran primarily is on ethics.
Yes.
Is on faith.
Yes, it's not on law, is it? The Quran.
It's not on law.
There are legal verses. This is true, but they're a small minority of the overall content itself.
It is a very, very small minority of the whole of the Quran, of the entirety of the Quran, and therefore today to emphasize those things as if that is what is paramount is a big injustice to themselves as well as injustice to the Quran, and therefore nowadays, I beg your pardon, sorry.
I just wanted to push back. I mean, I'm not not my position to disagree with you on this, but I'm just thinking some might say that in our post-colonial world, where most of the Muslim world was occupied and ruled by either Britain or France and a few others, where, say, in France, they imposed the Napoleonic legal code, say in Egypt and other places. Britain obviously did the same in Egypt, in India. It is not some of this attempt to reinstate Islamic law understandable as a pushback against the legacy, the enduring legacy of colonialist legal dominance over and on the Muslim world? So is that the reason why this is? I'm not saying you're wrong, but is that perhaps a reason for the accentuation of this issue because of what's happened historically in the last century or so?
Well, that might be some of it, but I don't think that is a reasonable explanation as to why we are like we are today. Right. That we are trying to reinstate this Islamic law because we were colonized. I don't think that is something that is justifiable, actually. I mean, it's not wrong. I mean, there is some truth to that as well. But why, for example, did these Muslim countries decide that they were going to secularize their thinking? And how did they do that? They did that through the corruption of their language, of the meanings of their language. Gosh. I mean, look at the North African countries now. Their language is so Frenchified, we would say, Frankified, whatever you call it, Frankified.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Malay world, for instance. We have an anglicized version of Malay, and we don't realize what kind of a scientific language we have. Neither do the Arabic language speakers understand how scientific their language is. And as a result, today we find things like ideologies that are foreign to our worldview seeping in. And this is what my father was trying to emphasize in that book, Islam and Secularism. He was warning about the secularism as a philosophical program, not secularism as a more or less to be a secular person. That's not what he meant. He meant secularism as a philosophical program, because that is the thing that affects one's thinking, one's mentality, one's intellect.
There's one thing that impressed me about your father's work was the profundity and depth that he goes. He's not dealing with superficialities here. He talks about the de-Westernization of knowledge, how this has to happen, and how the concept of religion, the foundations of ethics and morality have been affected at a very deep level in the Muslim societies. And there's a very profound work, actually. And I'm particularly impressed, if I don't mean to patronize, but his grasp of the Western Christian background, and also the secularization process, its origins in the West, and ultimately goes back to Rome and Greece. A fascinating and profound insight into that, which I benefited from, and I will reuse in the future, inshallah.
Yes, that's a very, very important work, actually. This is the thing. I mean, when he talks about de-Westernization, he is again trying to emphasize that the Muslims have corrupted their own language, the meanings of the terms in their language. And this is very dangerous, because already today we can, I mean, this is written in 1976, but already today we can see that the truth of what he has said has already become manifest in our world today. We have corrupted the language such that the meanings have altered. When we talk about science, for instance.
Right, that's great. I was looking at particular examples, yeah.
Okay, when we talk about science, for instance, we use the term ilm instead of using the word tabi'iyat, because that's really what we're talking about. Because when Western scholarship talks about science, they are talking about the physical, phenomenological science.
Yes, absolutely.
But when you say ilm, it doesn't refer only to the phenomenological.
No, that's right.
But we have done that. We have corrupted that meaning, and we have more or less conflated the two.
Wow, because the scientific method in the West is materialist. I mean, it only acknowledges as real, I suppose, what can be observed and quantifiable.
Exactly, it's empiricism.
In a phenomenological sense, in terms of what we can perceive, the phenomena of the universe. But ilm, the Islamic understanding of knowledge or science, is, it includes the unseen, of course. It includes those which we don't have phenomenological access to as human beings. So, the Day of Judgment, angels, jinn, etc., etc. So it's a much more holistic, metaphysical understanding of science, of knowledge, than the limited dunya-based materialist perspective of Western science. And of course, that's not science in a neutral sense. That is the outcome or the product of the post-Enlightenment tradition, which defines the methodology in a particular way. There are other ways of defining science, Islamically, of course.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, when they define sciences, they are defining it according to their worldview, the Western worldview. Exactly. And when we say Western worldview, we mean the Judeo-Christian tradition, that worldview.
Yes.
And so when they define their sciences, we can already see that this conflict that they have had is because they don't have a foundation which has already been ascertained to be certain. Unlike the Muslim civilization, what we mean is this, that the Western worldview, or the worldview of the West, is always in a state of becoming.
Yes.
It never actually is.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas for the Muslim, when we say the worldview of Islam, we are talking about a worldview which has already been established, which has already been firmly fixed.
Yes.
But we don't seem to understand that. We have gone away from that, again, because the greatest threat, according to what my father says in that book, that we are facing is that. We are facing this surreptitious absorption of Western secular mindset, the secular philosophical system that has come into our intellectual processes. And then we have become confused. And then we start thinking about what is justice. And we start debating, having long debates about what justice is. And it's ridiculous, because then we seem to always go back to justice from the legalistic point of view, from the point of view of the penal code, that kind of thing, and it's ridiculous.
The hudud punishments then becomes a hallmark of the restoration of Islamic law, but of course, hudud punishments are a tiny fraction of the Sharia anyway. Let alone,
I mean, even if it was, let's just look back in history. Can you tell me a time in history where the hudud was as severe as it is today? Where the hudud was applied as liberally as it is today? Yes. Where the Muslims were as puritanical as they are today?
Yes.
I mean, we have groups now going to Western countries to see the Muslim communities in Western countries. And they are going over there and they are telling them, look, there is no such thing as madhabs. This madhab is all just a dream.
Gosh.
Why are they doing this?
That's very
dangerous. You are adding to the confusion and the corruption of knowledge. Because you are trying to fit your own kind of system, very puritanical, very puritanical kind of thinking and ideology into something which does not admit this. And as a result, again, the Muslims become the punching bag for the political realm. And that's actually today. I mean, what we have witnessed is how these unjust political aspirations and hunger for power have resulted in the political manipulation of religion and belief. It's politics that does this, and it's an extremist view. Now, I've said before on one of my other videos, very briefly, I think I mentioned before about extremism. Right. How should we understand this extremism? And we understand it as one of my videos mentioned before, that we understand extremism to be like a double-edged or double-sided coin. On the one hand, you have extremism of excess, and on the other hand, you have extremism of defect. In both cases, you are ignorant of the limits of truth.
Yes. Can you define then the? I recall watching your exposition of this. Can you define what these two extremes are, and what's the via media, or the middle path, as the Quran calls it?
Well, this extremism of excess is simply like what it says, is that you go beyond the limit of truth. You go way beyond the limit of truth. That's an extremism of excess, and therefore you are committing an injustice. And then the extremism of defect is the other way, that you fall short of the limits of truth, of whatever it is that you're trying to assess. And therefore you have to have a certain degree of wisdom and knowledge of justice and knowledge of yourself as well, because yourself, you also have to put yourself in its right and proper place.
Okay, I mean, this is fascinating. I noticed on your YouTube channel, which, by the way, I will link to in the description below. It's your official YouTube channel. That someone had asked you a very interesting question, and if I may repeat it to you, you did actually address it in one of your videos. It wasn't too long ago, I think. The questioner asked you, how do we situate the position of Islam in politics today? There is so much misuse and abuse of Islam in politics today, he says. The link is subtle, but it is clear in these past decades that the abuse of Islam has stunted our development. Is there anything that could help us better understand how to resuscitate the true and rightful place of Islam in politics today? End quote. And I think you thought that was a particularly interesting question. And could you just briefly address your response to that?
Well, first of all, I think the person who asked that question perhaps did not realize that Islam, what he's asking, how do you position Islam in politics? I mean, you are asking, how do you position a religion in politics? But this is not what we understand it to be. There has to be some kind of understanding of what is meant by how do you position Islam in politics, because we are not going to position a religion in politics. Politics is not Islam is not subservient to politics. No. Although it does appear like it is today. What we need to understand, therefore, is that these political aspirations, as I mentioned earlier, politicians have abused the religion of Islam for their own manipulation and grasp of power. They are all power hungry. They want to remain in power. They want to remain having control. And these are the ones who are false leaders, actually, because in reality, when you think about it, if you are going to position anything in politics, it should be the ethical values of Islam. Right. And the first thing should be that you should be someone who tells the truth. In one of my videos as well, I was talking about one of the companions asking the Prophet, what is a good man? And the Prophet said, a good man is one who tells the truth when he speaks, who keeps his promise when he makes one, and who holds fast to a trust when he's given that trust. And therefore, you can summarize, therefore, that a bad man is one who, when he speaks, he tells a lie, When he makes a promise, he breaks it. And when he's given a trust, he shirks that trust. All of which happen in politics today. So I mean, just think about this. If you want to position anything into politics, you should position this. And what is that? This is ethics. You should take what Islam says about ethics, and you should get those people who exemplify and who personify that ethics, and not anybody else. Otherwise, you are going to get what you have today, and that is the false leadership. And it's going to continue, because these people now, the false politicians and false leadership, they have hijacked not only the religion, but they've also hijacked the faithful community. Because now the faithful community is by and large ignorant. This is again what Juwayni says when he was classifying the people into 4 categories. He said the first category is one who knows and knows he knows. This is an alim. Follow him. And then Juwayni said the second one is he who knows not, he who knows but knows not he knows. So warn him, because he's like one who's asleep, doesn't realize. This person is also not of any use to you. Then there's the third kind. He said, he who knows not, but knows he knows not. These are the jahil. In other words, the simple ignorant. Therefore, you can teach them. But the last kind, he said, the ones who know not and know not they know not, these are worse than donkeys. He said, stay far away from them. Now,
a lot of those I've noticed around on social media and everywhere else. That last category is quite common, unfortunately, today.
Well, I mean, the general population, the general community is like the third category, the ones who know not, but they know not, and therefore you should teach them.
There's a humility there. The people are, of course, being taught, and they're not arrogantly claiming knowledge that they clearly don't have.
No. It's just simple ignorance, and therefore it's up to you. It's up to you, the one who has alim, the one who has ilm, the alim. It's up to him to teach. But you can't be someone who does not understand, or who claims to understand, and yet you don't, and then you pretend as if you are responsible for that kind of knowledge when you are not, and then go and portray yourself as if you are. Because then you are corrupting knowledge. This is what happens, that you are not prepared to accept that responsibility of truth. And yet you take it because you think you are, because you don't know yourself. You remember there's that Hadith Qudsi, isn't it? The one that says, he who knows himself knows his Lord. This is the thing, you have to know yourself. In other words, you have to put yourself in the right place, and that requires knowledge. It requires you to have knowledge of that they are rightful places of things, and you know that where to put these places in their right places.
Could it not be said? I mean, your point is well taken. Actually, I don't think anyone could really disagree with that. But there is a possible additional element to that maybe you're not acknowledging. Some people might say is that you're criticizing the ulama for not perhaps teaching or not getting their message across, and about moral responsibility, moral renewal, justice, and so on. But there are developments in the world today which outstrip anyone's or most people's capacity just to know what the answer is, just to teach about it, just to teach Islam. I'm thinking technological developments, developments in AI, developments in all sorts of medical issues, in vitro fertilization, etc. These are quite technical developments, which there's no obvious classical application of any knowledge that we have. Now, there may be an analogical application, so we can see an analogy with this past issue we know about, with this new situation we find ourselves in, yes. But there is an element of, is there not an element of the ulama not being caught off guard because we don't know what the changes are, but nevertheless having to consider and reflect and assess over time, and just going in and teaching the answer as if there is an answer when there is actually new things coming along on the world scene because of technology and so on. You see what I mean? So it may be that it's not just a question of applying what the tradition, but engaging that tradition with the new developments, with some new developments we're seeing in the world around us, which are, because of the hegemony of the West, are unavoidably impacting our lives sooner or later.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to ask you to give an example of what you mean by this. Like, for
Well,
instance, hold on, Paul, but I just want to address this thing first.
Mm.
You are saying that these ulama, but who do you mean by this? Because once again, we come back to the problem of the corruption of knowledge, because now the Muslims have corrupted the meanings of these things. Who do they mean by ulama?
True.
Because now when you say ulama, it also refers to the ones who are the legalistic people. They are the ones who are called ulama. They are the ones who are asked to give judgments based on legalistic points of view. Is this haram? Is this makruh? Is this halal? What? And that seems to be what the Muslims love to hear. They always ask this question: is it okay if I do this? What does the hukum say about that? Is it okay if I do that? What does the hukum say about this? No mention at all about ethics. So now, Paul, give me an example of what you mean by this new developments, technological developments, and what, for instance, is going to affect the Muslims to such an extent that they don't know how to answer.
No, I'm not saying they don't know. I'm saying that because of I was thinking in medical ethics or in technology, artificial intelligence, in medical ethics, in vitro fertilization, forms of medical intervention which create ethical. This is not a Muslim problem, by the way. Only it's a problem for everyone. So this is not. I'm not castigating Muslims at all here, or the ulama. I'm saying that we as a species have to confront the implications of these developing technologies in terms of what it means to be human, even with transhumanism, for example, and I mentioned AI. It's not obvious. It's not perhaps immediately apparent to many people at all how we understand these realities and how we interpret them and what is ethical, as you say, let alone haram and halal about it. I don't have answers to your point, but it's just that the groundwork is shifting subtly in certain areas. And we as a species have to reflect on these developments and how we embrace them. Do we put limits on them? Do we just allow untrammeled development of technology? I mentioned transhumanism. It's a very challenging time for the ulama, and this is not just a reactionary point. It's how to cope with these developments.
There has to be some limits put on them, because there has to be a limit of truth. And I mean, if we're talking about AI, are we saying therefore that we are going to completely discount the nature of man?
Right.
I mean, that's not possible. I mean, when we are talking about a Muslim and Islam, how do you discount the nature of man? And is there such a thing as the nature of artificial intelligence? In the same kind of analogy, I mean, vis-a-vis the nature of man, there isn't. Man is the one who has created this artificial intelligence. He is the one that it is incumbent upon him to put limits on these things.
Yes,
it is not something which can just be left as a value-free type of thing. I mean, Islam does not admit that.
No, indeed, and that's a curse, I think, of much Western science. It just sees itself as untrammeled, unconstrained. If it can be invented, we'll invent it. If we can do it, we'll do it without any real moral sense of who we are as a human being. As you say, there are clear understandings of what we are as a human being from in Islam.
Well, that's the difference between the worldview of the West, as we mentioned earlier, always in a state of becoming, and the worldview of Islam that has already become established. I mean, this is one good example, because we are not saying that knowledge is value-free. On the contrary, we are saying that knowledge is value-laden. We are not going to admit the other possibility.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. So, in terms of your Dr. Syed Ali, your ongoing work today, what kind of projects are you involved in terms of intellectual activity or production of books?
Well, interestingly enough, you mentioned about now the world has been changing and things like this, and I see this. I mean, I see how this world, especially now with this fourth industrial revolution push, that everyone is trying to jump on the bandwagon for fear of being left behind, according to what these experts are telling us.
Exactly.
But I don't think that we have actually sat down and analyzed exactly what is being meant by this fourth industrial revolution and what it means for the Muslim world. And in terms of these kind of things that you asked just now, like in terms of advancement in medicine, advancement in technology and things like that, there are no curriculums to speak of in the Muslim world today that actually deal with the ethics connected to these kind of projects. And that's what I'm trying to establish now. I'm trying to establish some kind of an ethical guidelines for these kind of projects, and where do we draw the line? Where is the limit of truth? And this has all been collated. This is actually an idea that I've been thinking of for the past 10 years or more, actually. And it's all as a result also of what my father has been teaching and what my father has been intimating to me. And this is a result of that, because I think to myself now that we have become, I mean, especially in Malaysia here, I'm talking about our country, that we've become so caught up in the race to join this industrial revolution without even realizing that we are not even one of the top 25 countries in the world that's involved in this. So where actually do we position ourselves? And this is something that we haven't even thought of. There are many other things. I mean, people now are talking about the environment as if it's a sudden vogue subject. You know, conservation, the environment, and then they write books about conservation, the environment, according to what Islamic law says. And I think it's, again, ridiculous, because they are not using, I mean, they are using the kind of logic I would call, I mean, I think that's a stretch if I were to say that, but if I were to say that it's epistemological logic rather than Quranic logic. I mean, they look at the Quran and they quote these verses from the Quran out of context sometimes. In other words, they quote them from abstract and apply them to what they're thinking of. And it doesn't really apply sometimes. Or sometimes they are completely wrong. And then they write these books about that and say, this is what Islamic law says about it. And I think that's a big mistake, because as I said before, that the Quran is primarily, I mean, the large majority of the Quran talks about ethics, talks about Iman, talks about your relationship with your neighbor, talks about tolerance, these kind of things. That's the majority of the Quran. So I mean, sorry.
No, I mean, I'm just on that point, but another slightly controversial, very controversial subject. The West now has got a new religion. Some people would say, some people call it Wokism, an abbreviation. We're talking about ethics and the Quran and the Sunnah. But this religion, as some people call it, is not only being propagated by media corporations, but becomes a diplomatic and political compulsion. The America, enforces this, is often tied to foreign aid, foreign policy, and so on. So it's serious stuff. And because of the dominance of the West at the moment, this is being pumped around the world, and Muslims are certainly expected, without any dissent, to jump on board this agenda. We saw that at Qatar, the World Cup, of course, the way the West treated a very small Muslim country that was, not perfect, but it was doing its best to hold on to Islamic values in certain areas. Maybe not in all areas, but in certain areas, certainly this area anyway, I think. So, this is not, is it not just a question of teaching ethics and so on? It's dealing with this asymmetry of power that exists in the world between a West that, as always, of course, thinks it's right, and therefore the rest of the world must agree with it or else, and the Muslim world that would rather not go along with it because it is clearly contrary to faith, well, all faiths, I would have thought, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and others, in terms of this understanding what it means to be human, what it is to be male and female, a binary duality rather than the alphabet duality, whatever that is. So the discussion.
See, well, that again goes back to the same question of corruption of knowledge. I mean, we don't know where the limits are, where the limits of truth are, and therefore we just accept everything. That's ridiculous. I mean, this is a point I think that you have made very correctly and wisely, because where is the courage in the Muslim world? Why are the Muslim governments themselves not asking the West to define what they mean? They never have said this. I've been to several of these conferences representing Malaysia, and on things like human rights and dignity and things, tolerance. This was in the past. And at every one of those conferences, I asked them to define what they mean when they say tolerance, what they mean when they say human rights, what they mean when they say justice, because what they define might not be what I agree with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, for instance, tolerance is a good example. One of the Catholic participants, he said, he opened his speech by saying nobody wants to be tolerated. So when I came to speak, I said, this exactly is what I'm trying to allude to, is that for the Muslims, when we talk about tolerance, we don't talk about a grin and bear it kind of attitude.
Grudging.
Even though we don't like the person, we are forced to sit with them. We just tolerate it. We don't, that's not how the Muslims understand tolerance. That we understand tolerance in the sense of a forgiveness, inclusivity, a love, that kind of thing. It's all a positive, not a negative. So for the Muslim, that's again from the language what we use when we say samaha. We talk about the conceptual philosophy of tolerance, not tolerate like what the Anglo-Saxon articulation is. We don't agree with that. The same with justice. I mean, we include fairness in our understanding of justice. But when we say fairness, we don't mean that everyone should get the same thing. No. That's not what we mean by fairness. As far as we are concerned, it's you get what you deserve. That is fair.
Yes, well, that's right. I'm thinking, the way that the West typically treats men and women, and so fairness there would mean treating them exactly the same with complete equality. That's the term.
You see, that's another thing that we don't agree with. I mean,
you would say, of course, but you would say that's not justice because it's not recognizing the appropriate station or position or role of these two groups. So to treat everything as the same is not just. In fact, it's an injustice because it denies the differences between male and female. Perhaps, yeah.
But not only that. I mean, in fact, somebody was asking me this before about that and about equality. And I was saying that we should not talk about a right. We should first start talking about a responsibility. The amanah part comes before the haqq.
Yes.
Now, if you have already accepted that responsibility, and if you are responsible for that thing, only then do you have a right to it. Then you can start talking. But if you don't, then you should not be starting to talk about having the same right because you have not accepted the responsibility. And this is the thing that when we sit down, we can sit down and speak and talk, and we can disagree. We don't have to agree, but we also have to ask for clarification, and we ourselves should give proper definitions. And this is something I think that the Muslim world, political world, continually fails to do. They are more apologetic than anything else. I mean, it's just like what you alluded to earlier.
Why are they so deferential, so apologetic? But why is this disposition towards the other, the West, such a part of their relationship? What's the reason for that?
Well, I think again, there are many examples in the Quran. One of which I think next time I make a video, I'll probably talk about this. There is a story in the Quran about a man named Qarun. In the Christian religion, he is called Korah. I can't remember which what do you call it, book of the Bible that refers to him, Korah. This fellow Qarun, he existed during the time of the Prophet Musa, and he was an extremely wealthy person. Of course, in the Old Testament, his wealth is exaggerated greatly. The Quran, of course, makes a more reasonable estimation of his wealth, but nonetheless, he's an extremely wealthy person. They say that it took hundreds of camels to carry the keys to his treasure, which he kept in Egypt. And this Qarun, he had followers. He had maybe 200 or 300 followers. And these people were so arrogant because they thought that wealth bought them power and knowledge. And so they were very envious of the Prophet Musa because he was a prophet. People respected him. He had the knowledge. He had the truth. But he didn't have the money. He had the power because he had lots of followers. But this Qarun, he was upset. He said, why am I not the one who is also the same as Musa? After all, I'm extremely wealthy. I have great followers. I have power as well. So I should be the same status. And it's because of his arrogance that Allah destroyed him. Now, today, we have many Qaruns today. Most of them are in positions of power and wealth. These are the politicians. These are the ones who rule countries. And they look at those with more wealth and more power with such admiration, just like people looked at Qarun and said, we wish we were like them. Oh, these people are our idols. Bill Gates, what a fantastic person. He's got so much money. He must be a great man. You know, this is the kind of thing. We don't realize that we are looking at the modern day Qarun. We are not looking at what they have to offer in terms of their wealth of knowledge. We are looking at what they have to offer in terms of their power, their wealth, their influence. That's it. And so for now, like I said, false leadership looks towards these people in the West who are powerful, who are rich, and they look at them and want to be like them, want to get the kind of following that they have.
So it's
want
envy.
to be admired like them.
Yeah, we're looking at envy then, aren't we? There's a healthy desire to emulate and be like them, but these are not role models, as you say, from the example in the Quran.
That's the thing, and we don't understand that there is already the tamthil in the Quran with this Qarun. This is the thing. I mean, it's not like, that's what I'm saying. People read the Quran, but they don't actually see what is being said there in the Quran sometimes. I mean, sometimes I myself, when I read, I sometimes miss certain things. But if you actually examine and look at it properly, this is why whenever people ask me about my father, how does he come up with these ideas and how does he write? I mean, first of all, it's a bit of an insolent question to be asking, how does my father come up with these ideas? Because Allah has given him this gift. He has this wisdom, he has this knowledge, he has this genius. But he is not the kind of person who uses epistemological logic or ontological logic. He uses Quranic logic. He uses the Quran as his source because he understands the Quran. Excuse me. And so for us now, when the Muslim world is in this kind of a state, in other words, the people who are holding the mantle of power and authority, and in that ambit of authority, they also claim to have the ambit of knowledgeable authority as well. This is dangerous because what they've done is they have misused the knowledge, they have misinterpreted truth, and they have turned it into poisonous falsehood. That's what they've done. And therefore, something which is a simple matter can mushroom into a big problem, which is exactly what we have today. We don't allow the people who actually have real, true knowledge to speak. Instead, we invite somebody else simply because that person has, let's say, 100,000 followers, 200,000 followers on YouTube, 1 million followers on YouTube, and you admire them and, oh, this fellow's a hero. Simply because of that. Because the man is talking something which perhaps is entertaining. And perhaps he has more of a charismatic nature. And therefore you feel, ooh, you have to follow this man. You are not thinking about what comes out of his mouth. You are not thinking about the kind of things that he is trying to impart, the kind of knowledge, the kind of truths. And then people will say, yeah, but then how do we know that what you say is true? I mean, that's your truth. Again, this is the influence of the secular philosophical program. Now we have come to a point that we are talking about your truth, as if truth has now become subjective.
Yes, I'm fascinated how philosophers and thinkers in the West, particularly places like France, people like Foucault and others, kind of postmodernist thinkers, their thought in this regard was confined to the ivory tower, in a generation ago, but how it's percolated down, not just in France, but then later on in the United States, in California. It took a while to get to America, but once it did, so in Foucault's case, for example, how he is now lionized, how he is taught and treasured and so on. This is a guy who was around in the 1980s in France. So, but then, of course, these ideas then seep through into the media and journalists and other people, influencers, and so it becomes part of the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist. So it's fascinating how these ideas move down the hierarchy, if you like, of in the West. And so what's going to be the next worldview? But the ideal all truth is relative.
These ideas are filtered through the minds of those who are not prepared to understand these things properly. What is being said by the philosophers in the past, for instance, if it filters through a mind which is not prepared and not prepared, does not have the prerequisite to understand the kind of things that these people are talking about, then obviously how they understand it and then later on present it is a corruption of those ideas, and that's what we refer to as corruption of knowledge. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's why education is so important. Understanding the origins of these ideas, and also to something I'm very keen on communicating, not to you but other people perhaps, is that these ideas, which are now part of the air we breathe, are very recent. They weren't around a century ago, or at least not to the bulk of society, and they are relative to a particular geographical area of the globe. You know,
Yes.
Europe really, ultimately, France, Germany, Britain. These ideas have their roots in John Locke and other philosophers and thinkers, and they have seeped in an influence. And to understand the origins, the genealogy of morals, to borrow Nietzsche's expression, is really helpful, because it helps to demystify and relativize these ideologies. They're not just the truth or the way the world is. They're recent, culturally relative products of a certain trajectory of thought that we can trace back over centuries. And that exercise is really useful, I think.
All of these things have begun.
And your father has done that, by the way, exhaustively.
Yes.
And particularly, even more so, in the Prolegomena to the Metaphysics of Islam, where he discusses Kant, for example, and many other philosophers to great benefit, I think, to the reader.
Yes. I mean, that Prolegomena as well has important chapters in them. I mean, of course, the first one being the religion of Islam, the concept and foundation of, the concept of religion and the foundation of ethics and morality. Yes. And then, of course, there's also the nature of man, which is very important as well, because when it comes to education, that's another thing we have to understand, the nature of man itself.
Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah, I mean, I just love this. Some of the titles here. The nature of quiddity, on the nature of quiddity, page 227. I mean, the term, look it up. Not you, but look it up, is a fascinating word to use. And then on the general and the particular, quiddity, and on this the schema of ontological descent of absolute being. I mean, to people are interested in philosophy, this is very juicy stuff. But he's clearly bilingual. I mean, he's completely fluent in Western metaphysics and philosophy, and obviously in Islam as well. And that's kind of combination intellectually, and this exploration of these contrasting worldviews, and they are contrasting very much so, but he does in a particularly helpful way to elucidate what's going on. So in that way, I do recommend it for that as well.
Well, he has always said, I mean, I remember growing up listening to this. He's always said that in order for you to understand the West, you have to understand their philosophy. You have to understand. You have to understand their language. You have to understand their stories. All of these things have a very heavy bearing on Western intellectualism.
Precisely right. And therefore, ultimately, and people don't always perceive it, the media and the way our culture understands itself, it's not just an autonomous movement. It actually is fed in from the universities and the intellectuals and the more educated journalists who feed on these ideas. It's an organic process.
Well, I mean, all these things, I mean, all these philosophers, I mean, their philosophies, we can say it stems from a disenfranchisement with the church, with religion.
Yes, very true.
It began with this. Now, if you look at how the 11th century was in the Muslim world, and how the 11th century was in Brittany, for instance, it was like what we call the Dark Ages. But in the Muslim world, it was vibrant. There was philosophy, there was Ibn Rushd, there was Al-Ghazali, there was Ibn Sina. All these great philosophers were being taught, were being learned, there was a culture and civilization in Al-Andalus, Andalusia, which was just across the border. I mean, of course, we didn't have borders like we have today. But on the one hand, you have vibrancy in terms of intellectualism. On the other hand, you have a dearth of knowledge, all controlled by the church. I mean, there's one famous story, of course, about Saint Bernard of Assisi, who was asked to condemn Assisi's. I mean, what's Peter Abelard?
Oh yeah.
You know, Peter Abelard was trying to propagate the idea that in order to understand religion, you also have to use reason. And the church wouldn't have any of that. They said, no, you cannot use reason. It has to all be by faith, pure, blind faith. And so they asked Bernard Assisi, Saint Bernard of Assisi, rather, to condemn him, to condemn his writings. And this Peter Abelard, I mean, he got this kind of knowledge and learning from the Muslim world. He learned all this from Andalusia. So, I mean, what was the problem? And now, all of a sudden, we are talking about science as if That is the tell-all answers to everything. The what do you call it? Yeah,
absolutely.
as if that is the answer to everything, and it's not. I mean, like I said, I mean, we have conflated science with ilm.
But I mean, it's too late in our discussion now to go into this subject. But there are serious intellectual challenges presented by Western science, for example, in the Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. And I don't want to go off on that tangent particularly, but and there are good responses. I mean, Dr. Shoaib, for example, is a biochemist professor who's appeared on Blogging Theology. He's written an excellent book on Islam and evolution, which I recommend. So there are answers, but it's something that is causing intellectual and even moral confusion in the Muslim world about how to assimilate or just reject this idea. Or is it a problem? Is it just hominid evolution that's unacceptable, but animal evolution is acceptable? So there is this kind of thinking about it, which is moving forward now. But it is a challenge sometimes.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I was just about to mention that my father wrote another book about 4 or 5 years ago. It was called On Justice and the Nature of Man. And in that book, he first had to define what he means by man. And when he means man, he's talking about insan. He does not mean Homo sapien, because as far as we are concerned, we don't accept that. We don't accept that we are the Darwinist natural selection evolution from a different species, from a Homo before us. We are not Homo sapiens. That is their kind of classification. Their meaning the Western worldview of science. For us, we are insan. We are a special creation. And this special creation, like I said, it's already been proven in the Quran. Allah already talks about this in the Quran. And in that book that my father wrote on justice and the nature of man, he actually proves it. That the Quran, when Allah summons the angels and he says to them, I'm going to create a Khalifa, and he creates the Prophet Adam. And this is man, insan. He is not a species from a different he is not a different species from the same genus. He does. I mean, we do not follow into that Linnaeus classification. If we were to construct something similar to the Linnaeus or the Linnaean kind of classification, where he has animal, plant, and mineral, then as kingdoms, then we would say that man, in other words, insan, is a kingdom on its own. We would add another one. If we were going to follow the Linnaean kind of classification, we would say that man is a kingdom, animal is a kingdom, plant is a kingdom, mineral is a kingdom, and then we would go through all those level classifications that Linnaeus has projected. We are different species. I mean, we have the Chinese, we have the Indians, we have the Anglo-Saxon West. We have the Nordic, we have the African, we have the Arab, we have the Hebraic. We have all these what we can call species, but we are not in that Homo sapien category at all. We do not come from an evolved ape. We don't believe this. Furthermore, I mean, Darwin's is still a theory. It is not a factual evidence. It's still theory. Therefore, why can't the Muslim world come up with another curriculum now? If you want to say it's also a theory, that we are talking about this Quranic proof. If you want to say it's a theory, okay, we have an opposing theory to Darwin, and this is it. Now, if we say we want to come up with this kind of curriculum, then where would we put the curriculum? In what subject? Because in today's education curriculum, we are talking about evolution in a science curriculum. In other words, in a pure science curriculum.
Yes.
And that is a mistake. It's the wrong classification, because this Darwin's theory of evolution, because it's a theory of evolution, it should be under the philosophy of science, and not under a kind of science which is under the phenomenological sciences, the fixed sciences, the empirical sciences. It should not be there. It's wrongly classified. It's under the philosophy of science. And therefore, similarly, if you were to talk about a Muslim theory of who man is, which is what my father discusses in this on justice and the nature of man, then we can say that we are also going to classify it under a philosophy of science. And this should be offered to higher education, not to primary school children. This is not something that their minds can grasp. You have to have some kind of a prerequisite training first in order to grasp these higher order thinking. And that only can happen in universities and institutions of higher learning. This is what I've been trying to be working on when it comes to developing curriculums for our institutions of higher learning, developing some kind of an answer to questions the Muslims might have when it comes to, as you mentioned just now, the technological world, the technological realm, the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, we have many, many good and fine scholars in the Muslim world, but they have been silenced by the voices of mediocrity, and these are in the masses. Unfortunately, we have lots of fine scholars who have contributed greatly in the field of economics, for Islamic economics and finance, for instance, but no one wants to listen to them because it doesn't seem to pair very nicely with the conventional system, or what the so-called financial experts who are actually graduates of the school of jurisprudence talk about today. Unfortunately, they don't want to listen to us. They don't want to listen to those people who have that Quranic reasoning, the Quranic logic. They would rather listen to someone else with a very, like I said, this jurisprudence is actually a very easy subject. And therefore we place such heavy emphasis and importance on an easy subject. It's ridiculous. It's no wonder that we can feel the stupidity. I mean, I can actually feel the weight of that stupidity.
Amazing way of putting it. I mean, I guess one of the things that I find slightly comforting to remember is that the world is has always changed. We're always in a process of rapid change. I don't just mean modernity. I mean, you look over the centuries, you look at the borders on maps, you look at the countries that then exist and that don't exist now, even the last two generations. The fluidity of history is remarkable when one looks at it in that longer term depth perspective. And so, although what you're saying may be true, it's not. We're not necessarily here forever. That things do change. Who knows what Allah, of course, is in control. Who knows what the future will bring? And inshallah, we will move towards a greater true knowledge rather than partial, distorted knowledge in the future. If, as you say, there are so many scholars and ulama who have answers, who have expertise, who can, the knowledge is there. It just needs to be applied, basically accepted and applied in people's lives, rather than just theoretical book knowledge that's ignored, perhaps, as you say. Would you share that optimism or that?
Yes, of course. I mean, as far as we are concerned, being a Muslim means that we are not supposed to be pessimistic. We are always optimistic. I mean, that's surah in the Quran. You know, whenever there's always going to be the bright side coming. There's always going to be a better future coming. This is what Allah guarantees, and we are sure of this. So obviously, we are optimistic, and it may not happen in our lifetime, but still, we have to at least make the effort, because that is part of being a Muslim, is that we must make the effort. If we know something to be true, we can't keep silent. There is that hadith, isn't it? That if you find something to be in error, you have to strive as much as you can, either with your words, with your deeds, or with your heart, although that is the weakest. That is one of the hadith narrated.
That's right. No,
and therefore, we are trying to do all these things. We are trying to do it with our works, with our tongues, or with our voices, and of course with our hearts as well. And inshallah, we will come to a place where we can say, yes, we have actually achieved some small milestone in trying to bring some kind of reasonable truth to what is happening. And it's interesting that you mentioned, excuse me, about history and how things are always changing. That is true. But the one thing that does not change is the worldview of Islam. The worldview of Islam does not change. We have to adapt to whatever it is and fit it according to what the worldview of Islam is trying to teach or trying to impart upon us. Not that we should change the worldview because times are changing. That's not the way it is. And we have to understand history, not just the what do you call it? The batin aspect. I mean, the zahir aspect of history. In other words, the when and the what. This is the zahir aspect.
Yeah, the external.
What Ibn Khaldun likes to say this. We also have to understand the batin aspect, the why and the how. The whys and the hows. And this is one thing that the Muslims today, they don't seem to want to learn. And when they do want to learn, they're not going to check properly to find out, because how history is written today may be actually factually incorrect, depending on who writes it.
Depending on who writes it, yes, this is a very good point.
Who writes the history, and therefore you have to be careful.
That's very true.
You have to have also some education and knowledge yourself.
Alhamdulillah. Well, perhaps we'll draw to a close there. Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik, thank you very much indeed for your time, your expertise. I know you're a very busy man. I will just reiterate and repeat, because I think it's worth repeating. Yes. If folks want to learn more about this subject, particularly secularism and the deeper understandings and the issues, the philosophy, the ideologies, the ideas, and the different paradigms that Islam has from the secular West, this is an excellent book to get to read. I'm just reading it through myself, and I'm really appreciating its insights. And also, this is, I think, much more demanding, intellectually advanced book, to be honest. I would say easily postgraduate level. The Prolegomena or the Metaphysics of Islam. It's very advanced, but it's also extremely valuable, I think.
Yes, it is. It's invaluable, actually.
There's lots of meat in there to chew on, I think. And,
yes.
And lastly, but not least, of course, is Dr. Syed's official YouTube channel, which I will put, as I said before, in the description below. Do see, you do periodically post talks, lectures on various subjects related to what we've just discussed today.
Yes,
and I do recommend that people have a look at that too. So thank you very
much, Paul. It's been a great pleasure to be on your program today, and I thank you for your invitation and for your kind conviviality. I'm really appreciative of everything that you have done for this channel and for myself as well included.
Alhamdulillah. Well, that's very words of praise from you, but belong to Allah in the first instance, and I'm grateful to Him, and I'm appreciative of your kind words as well. So, inshallah, we'll see you again. Thank you very much. Until Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.